There's something about leaving a place behind that most people don't talk about. Not the leaving itself, that part's easy. You pack your bag, zip the tent, walk away. The hard part comes later. Miles later. Hours later. Sometimes in the middle of the night, lying in your own bed, 200 miles from where you were. That's when it starts. This low, irrational hum at the back of your mind. Is everything still the way I left it? It's a strange thought, if you really sit with it. Because of course it is. No one is going to move your coffee mug an inch to the left while you're gone. No one is going to unfold your sleeping bag and lie down in it and then fold it back exactly the way it was. The world doesn't work like that. Objects stay where you put them. Rooms hold their shape, except when they don't. I need to tell you about a camping trip. October, 3 years ago. Northeastern Washington. A part of the state that most people from Washington have never even heard of, let alone visited. The Kettle River Range, low mountains covered in Douglas fir and western larch, cut through with creeks that run ice cold even in August, and dotted with glacial lakes so remote that some of them don't have names. We'd been doing this for 5 years, me, my wife Maren, and our friend Cal. Every October, the three of us would disappear into the woods for 4 or 5 days. No cell service, no agenda, no obligations. Just trees and fire and the kind of conversation that only happens when you've been walking all day and the sun is going down and there's nothing left to perform. It started the year after college. Cal and I had been roommates and Maren and I had just gotten married, and we were all suddenly living in different cities, working jobs that made us tired in ways we hadn't known existed. Cal called one night in September and said, "I need to go somewhere that doesn't have Wi-Fi." I said, "How far?" He said, "Far enough that I forget my own phone number." So we drove to Olympic National Park and slept in a 2-person tent that technically fit 3 if none of you minded breathing each other's air for 8 hours. We ate canned soup heated over a camp stove that took 45 minutes to boil water. Maren got a blister on her left heel that she didn't mention until it popped on the 3rd day. Cal got sunburned so badly on his nose that it peeled for 2 weeks. It was the best trip any of us had ever taken. After that, it became a tradition. Each year, we went somewhere more remote. Year 2 was the North Cascades, a backcountry site 12 miles from the nearest road. Year 3 was the Pasaitan Wilderness, where we didn't see another human being for 72 hours. Year 4 was the Selkirk Mountains, just south of the Canadian border, in a valley so narrow that the sun only reached the bottom for about 4 hours a day. Each trip was Cal's idea. He was the one who found the locations, who studied the topographic maps, who called ranger stations and asked about trail conditions with the enthusiasm of someone planning a heist. Cal was the engine of the tradition. Maren and I were the ones who showed up. Year 5, the Kettle River Range. Cal had found it on an old forestry survey map, the kind that was hand-drawn in the 60s, with contour lines in faded brown ink and place names written in a cartographer's careful hand. There was a lake on the map, unnamed, sitting in a shallow basin at about 4,200 feet. No trails leading to it, no campground symbols, no anything. Just a small blue oval in a sea of green with a thin blue line running north from it that might have been a creek or might have been a cartographic guess. "There's an old logging road that gets within 8 miles, Cal said over the phone 3 weeks before the trip. "Decommissioned in the 80s. It's on satellite view, but barely. We'd have to bushwhack the last mile or 2. "What's at the lake?" I asked. "Nothing, that's the point." Marin was sitting across from me at the kitchen table when I hung up. She was grading papers. She taught 7th grade biology, and she had that expression she got when she was listening to a conversation while pretending not to. "How remote?" she said without looking up. 8 miles from the car. No trail for the last stretch." She nodded slowly, pen still moving across a student's lab report. "Cal found it on one of his old maps? A forestry survey from 1974. She looked up then. Not alarmed, exactly, but something close to it, a kind of careful attention. The way you'd look at a weather forecast that's calling for something you're not sure you believe. "That's more remote than last year," she said. "That's the tradition." She held my eyes for a moment, then smiled. "Tell him we're in." We drove up on a Thursday morning in Cal's truck, an old Ford Ranger that smelled permanently of dog, even though Cal hadn't owned a dog in years. The drive from Seattle was 5 hours, the last two on Forest Service roads that got progressively narrower and rougher, until the pavement ended entirely and we were bouncing over packed dirt and loose gravel, the truck's suspension protesting every rut. The trees closed in. I remember that specifically, the way the forest seemed to lean over the road, the canopy thickening until the sky was just a bright seam above us. Douglas fir, most of it, with some western larch going gold in the October light. The understory was thick salal and Oregon grape and sword fern, everything still green despite the season, pressing against the road's edges like it was trying to reclaim the space. We parked at the end of a turnaround where the road simply stopped. No gate, no sign, no marker of any kind. Just the road ending and the forest beginning, a wall of green and brown that looked like it went on forever. Cell service had died about 40 minutes earlier. I'd watched the bars drop one by one on my phone and then disappear entirely, replaced by that small empty triangle that means you are alone with whatever happens next. We shouldered our packs and started walking. The old logging road was still visible if you knew what to look for: a slightly wider gap between the trees, a flatter line through the terrain, the occasional rotting stump cut flat by a saw rather than broken by wind. But nature had been working on it for 40 years, and nature was winning. Saplings grew in the roadbed. Moss covered the old tire tracks. In places, the road disappeared entirely under deadfall, and we had to climb over trunks 4 feet in diameter, bark sloughing off under our hands. 8 miles took us almost 5 hours. The forest was quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a place without traffic noise, something deeper than that. A held breath quiet. The kind of silence that made you aware of your own footsteps, your own breathing. The whisper of your jacket sleeves brushing against your sides. Occasionally, a bird would call from somewhere high in the canopy. A varied thrush, that strange descending whistle, and the sound would hang in the air like a question no one answered. Cal hiked out front, the way he always did, setting a pace that was just slightly faster than comfortable. He had that particular energy he always got in the woods, looser, more alive, like he was shedding layers of something with every mile. Marin walked behind him, her stride easy and even, the kind of walker who could go all day without complaint. I brought up the rear, which was my habit, partly because I liked watching the two of them move through the landscape, and partly because I've always been the kind of person who wants to know that nothing is behind him. We found the lake at 4 in the afternoon. I don't have the right words for what it looked like, but I need to try because it matters later. Understanding what that place felt like when we found it, what it promised, is part of understanding what happened. The forest opened without warning. One moment we were in dense timber, pushing through a thicket of young fir. And the next we were standing on a gravel shore looking at a lake that had no business being that beautiful. It was maybe 300 yards across, shaped roughly like a teardrop, with the narrow end pointing north where a small creek fed in. The water was a deep blue-green, the kind of color that only happens in glacial lakes, and it was perfectly still. Not a ripple, not a current. The surface was a mirror, reflecting the ridgeline to the west so precisely that for a disorienting moment, I couldn't tell which was real, the mountains or their image. The eastern shore, where we stood, was a flat bench of gravel and sand, about 30 yards deep, before the trees took over again. The other three sides were dense forest right down to the waterline, the trunks of old-growth fir rising straight up from the shore like columns in a cathedral. There were no signs of other people, no fire rings, no cleared spaces, no trash, no blazes on the trees, no boot prints in the gravel. The place felt untouched, unvisited, like we were the first people to stand there in a very long time, almost. Cal was the one who found it. He was walking the shoreline scouting for tent sites when he stopped and crouched down near the waterline. "Hey, come look at this." It was a tin can, small, maybe the size of a soup can, rusted the color of dried blood. It was half buried in the gravel, tilted at an angle, and when Cal worked it free, flakes of rust came off on his fingers like old paint. "Someone was here," he said. He turned the can over in his hands. There was no label, no markings, just rust and age. "Decades ago by the look of it," Marin said. She took it from him, examined it, handed it back. Cal set it on a flat rock near the shore, a granite slab about knee height that jutted out of the gravel like a natural shelf. "A monument to whoever was crazy enough to hike out here before us," he said. We made camp on the eastern shore. This is where I need to tell you something about myself that's going to matter later. I'm precise about camp setup, not in a way that anyone would call obsessive, but in a way that Marin and Cal had learned to accommodate over 5 years of trips. The tent goes in a specific spot, flat ground, door facing east, to catch morning sun. Boots go outside the vestibule, toes pointing outward. The cooler sits to the left of the fire ring, lid facing camp. Water bottles line up on the folding table, labels out. My book goes on top of my sleeping bag, open to whatever page I'm on, spine up. I know how this sounds, but I need you to understand. When I tell you later that everything was in exactly the right place, I need you to believe me. I need you to know that I'm the kind of person who would notice if something was a quarter inch off. We set up the tent, a 3-person Big Agnes that had been on every trip since our year 2. Nylon faded from green to a kind of sage by years of UV. Cal built the fire ring from stones he gathered along the shore, arranging them in a rough circle about 3 feet across. Marin unpacked the kitchen supplies and set up the folding table and chairs. And then she placed her camera on the table, a Canon mirrorless she used for everything, still powered on, the battery low from the hike. She plugged it into the small solar panel charger and set it on the table where it would catch the last of the afternoon sun, the green charging light blinking steadily. "I want full battery for tomorrow," she said. "Cal says the ridge views are supposed to be incredible." "Should be," Cal said from across camp, where he was splitting kindling with a hatchet. "If the old topo map is right, you can see the whole valley from up there." The first evening at camp was everything it was supposed to be. Cal got the fire going just as the sun dropped behind the western ridge, and the light went from gold to amber to that deep blue gray that only lasts about 20 minutes in the mountains before full dark. We cooked pasta on the camp stove and ate it out of metal bowls with our backs to the fire, watching the last light fade off the lake. Cal produced a flask of bourbon from somewhere in his pack, he always did, and it was always a different flask, each one more dented than the last. We passed it around. The whiskey burned in a way that felt appropriate. The fire crackled. The lake went black. We talked about nothing important and everything important. Cal's job, he managed a climbing gym in Bozeman and was thinking about quitting to guide full-time. Marin's students, a kid named Diego, who had just discovered that he loved microbiology with a passion that made Marin's whole year. My work, I was a structural engineer, and I was in the middle of a bridge project that I couldn't stop thinking about. The load calculations following me even here. But mostly, we just sat. There's a particular quality to campfire silence between people who know each other well enough to not need words. It's not awkward. It's not heavy. It's the sound of three people being exactly where they want to be. Around 10, Cal yawned and said he was turning in. Marin followed. I stayed by the fire for another few minutes, the way I always did, banking the coals and making sure everything was squared away. The night was cold, clear. Stars visible in the gaps between the canopy, more stars than I ever saw from the city. The Milky Way, a pale river across the sky. The lake was perfectly still, so still that the stars reflected in it. And for a moment it felt like I was sitting on a small island of firelight, floating in an infinite dark sky. I was about to stand up when I heard it. Something moving through the trees on the far side of the lake. Not close, maybe 150, 200 yards away, but heavy. The sound of weight on dry ground, branches shifting, underbrush compressing. Steady and unhurried, moving parallel to the shore and then fading gradually until the silence returned. Elk, I told myself, or deer. Big animals move through these forests at night. It's their time. We're the visitors here. I stood up, poured the last of my water over the coals, walked to the tent. Marin was already asleep, her breathing slow and even, her hand resting on the space between our sleeping bags, like she'd been reaching for me. Cal was on the far side of the tent, face to the wall, dead to the world within 30 seconds of lying down, the way he always was. I zipped the tent closed, pulled my sleeping bag up to my chin, closed my eyes. The forest was quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet, not empty full, the silence of a place that's holding its breath, the silence of a room that has one more person in it than you think. I lay there for a long time, listening to nothing. Eventually, I slept. I woke to cold air and gray light. The tent fabric was taut with condensation, tiny droplets beaded along the seams. And when I exhaled, my breath hung in front of my face like something solid. October mornings at 4,000 feet. The kind of cold that doesn't hurt, but reminds you, quietly and constantly, that comfort is a thing you brought with you, and it has limits. Marin was already awake. I could tell by the quality of her stillness, not the loose, heavy stillness of sleep, but the alert stillness of someone listening. She was lying on her side facing the tent wall, eyes open, one hand tucked under her cheek. "Morning," I said. "Something was walking around camp about an hour ago," she said. Not alarmed, matter of fact, the way she said everything. "Big, probably elk." "Probably." It stopped near the tent for a minute, then it moved off toward the water. "Did you look?" "No." She rolled over and met my eyes. I didn't want to. I didn't ask her why. I understood. There's a particular logic to lying in a tent in the dark while something large moves around outside. Looking doesn't help. If it's an animal, it will leave on its own. And if it isn't an animal, you don't want to know that while you're lying in a nylon shell a quarter mile from anything. Cal was already outside when we unzipped the vestibule. He'd restarted the fire from last night's coals and had water heating on the camp stove. He was sitting in his folding chair with a cup of instant coffee, looking out at the lake with the particular contentment of a man who believes he has found, at least temporarily, exactly where he's supposed to be. "Frost on the ground," he said. "Probably got down to 28, 30 degrees last night." He took a sip of his coffee. Perfect. The lake was glass. I don't mean calm, I mean it looked like a solid surface, like you could walk across it. The reflection of the ridge to the west was so precise that the waterline had disappeared entirely, and the world had doubled itself, mountains above and mountains below, separated by nothing. We ate oatmeal and drank coffee and planned the day. Cal had the topographic map spread on the table, weighted down with stones at the corners, and he traced the route north with his finger. 4 miles to this saddle, he said, tapping a tight cluster of contour lines. Then another half-mile along the ridge to this high point, 4,600 feet. If the map's right, you can see the whole valley from up there, the lake, the creek drainage, everything. "Trail?" Marin asked. "Maybe. There's an old blaze line marked on the survey map, but who knows if it's still there. Might just be deer paths." We packed day bags, water, food, rain layers, Cal's binoculars, Marin's phone for photos. Most of our gear stayed at Camp the tent, the sleeping bags, the cooler, the stove, Cal's fishing rod. Marin's camera still charging on the folding table. The green light, now solid. Full battery. And here's where my particular habit comes in. The one Marin calls my walkthrough. Before leaving any place I intend to return to a hotel room, a campsite, a parked car, I do a slow visual sweep. I look at everything. I register its position. I'm not checking that the stove is off, or that I haven't left my wallet behind. I'm creating a photograph in my mind, an exact image of how things are, so that when I return, I'll know if anything has changed. I know it sounds neurotic, maybe it is, but I've done it since I was a kid. My mother used to rearrange my room while I was at school, moving books and toys to what she considered better positions, and it used to make me feel like I was going slightly insane, like reality kept shifting by inches when I wasn't looking. So I started memorizing, and I never stopped. That morning, I stood at the edge of camp and took my inventory. Tent zipped to the exact midpoint of the door, the zipper pull hanging at 2 o'clock. My boots, outside the vestibule, toes pointing outward at roughly 45 degrees, right boot slightly forward. Marin's hiking sandals beside the tent's left guy line, soles up. Cal's boots, opposite side unlaced, tongues folded back. The cooler 3 feet to the left of the fire ring, lid closed, latch facing camp, a dish towel draped over the handle. The folding table, 2 chairs pushed in, one pulled back at an angle where Cal had been sitting. Marin's camera, center of the table, lens cap on, strap coiled beside it, solar panel cable still attached. My book, a paperback copy of The Living Mountain by Nan Shepard, on top of my sleeping bag inside the tent, open and spine up to page 143. Water bottles, 3, lined up on the right side of the table. Cal's red Nalgene, Marin's blue insulated bottle, my stainless steel one with the dented cap, Fire ring, coals from this morning, gray and cold. Cal's hatchet, leaning against the flat rock where he'd set the tin can yesterday. I looked at all of it. I held it. Then we walked north. The trail, if you could call it a trail, was a suggestion. A slightly less dense line through the trees where the undergrowth was shorter and the ground was firmer, as though feet, human or animal, had passed this way often enough to leave a memory in the earth. Old blazes appeared occasionally on tree trunks, faded orange rectangles that might have been painted 20 years ago or 50, their edges soft with age and lichen. The forest here was different from the terrain we'd hiked through the day before. Older. The trees were bigger. Some of the Douglas firs had trunks 5 or 6 feet across, their bark furrowed into deep vertical ridges, and the canopy was so thick that the forest floor was dark even at mid-morning, the light filtering down in isolated shafts that caught the mist and turned it gold. We fell into our usual order, Cal out front, moving with that fluid, slightly too fast pace of his, ducking under branches and stepping over roots without breaking stride. Marin behind him, steady and economical in her movement. Me at the back, watching them and the forest and the ground and everything. For the first mile and a half, it was beautiful. Just beautiful. The kind of walking where your body finds a rhythm and your mind goes quiet, and the world simplifies itself down to light and air and the feel of the ground under your boots. Cal pointed out a pileated woodpecker working a dead snag to our right, the bird's red crest vivid against the gray bark. Marin found a cluster of chanterelle mushrooms at the base of a fir and knelt to photograph them with her phone. I breathed deeply and felt for the first time in months something close to peace. Then Cal stopped. He was standing beside a large fir, maybe 3 feet in diameter, and he was looking at the trunk at about chest height. I came up beside him and saw what he was looking at. Tally marks. Groups of 4 vertical lines crossed by a diagonal carved into the bark with something sharp. A knife, probably. They were old. The cuts had darkened, and the bark had begun to heal around them, swelling slightly at the edges, the way skin swells around a scar. But they were unmistakable. Someone had stood at this tree and counted something, carefully and deliberately, group after group. I counted the groups. There were at least 40, maybe more. Some near the bottom were obscured by moss. Logger, Cal said, counting days on a crew maybe, or board feet. That's a lot of days, Marin said. I looked more carefully, and I noticed something Cal hadn't. The tally marks weren't all at the same height. The lowest group was about 3 feet off the ground. The highest was above my head, maybe 6.5 feet. They climbed the trunk in a rough spiral, as though carved over a long period of time by someone who grew taller, or by different people, standing in the same spot at different heights, or by the same person, returning year after year, carving at whatever height felt natural, adding to the count. What were they counting? Days? Visits? Something else? Let's keep moving, Marin said. She wasn't looking at the tree anymore. She was looking at the forest around us, and her jaw was set in that way it got, when she was processing something she hadn't decided how to feel about yet. We kept moving. 20 minutes later, we reached a creek. It was narrow, maybe 4 feet across, shallow, running clear over smooth stones and green moss. Easy enough to cross on a couple of well-placed rocks. Cal went first, hopping across without breaking stride. Marin followed. I was about to step onto the first rock when I looked down at the far bank and stopped. Cal? He turned back. Look at this. It was a boot print, pressed into the soft mud at the creek's edge, just above the waterline. Clear and well-defined. The tread pattern was visible in details. A heavy lug sole, deep grooves, the kind of tread you see on serious work boots. Not a hiking boot, something older, heavier, more utilitarian. And it was fresh. The edges were sharp. The mud hadn't begun to dry or crumble. No water had seeped into the impression. This print had been made recently. Today, maybe. Certainly within the last day. Cal crouched beside it. Huh. Someone else is out here, Marin said. Looks like it. I stared at the boot print and felt something shift in my chest. Not fear. Not yet. Something more like a recalibration. A small adjustment in my understanding of where we were and what kind of place this was. We'd assumed we were alone. The empty trailhead, the untouched lake, the absence of any signs of habitation. All of it had pointed to isolation, but someone was here. Someone with heavy boots who had crossed this creek recently. And they were heading south, the direction we had come from, toward the lake, toward our camp. Could be a hunter, Cal said, standing up, or a Forest Service guy. There's probably access from other directions we don't know about. Maybe, I said. It's one boot print, Nate, in the middle of a national forest. It'd be weirder if there were no signs of anyone at all. He was right. Logically, he was right. People hike in forests. People cross creeks. One boot print shouldn't rewrite the narrative. But I noticed that when we continued walking, Cal's pace was slightly slower, and Marin was no longer looking at the mushrooms and the light. She was looking at the ground, another mile. The trail climbed steeply through a section of younger forest, thinner trees, more light, the undergrowth thicker and harder to push through. We were breathing harder, talking less. The ridge was visible now through breaks in the canopy, a long, bare spine of rock and scrub rising above the tree line. Then we came to the clearing. It opened up suddenly, the way a room opens when you turn a corner you didn't know was there. One step we were in dense timber. The next, we were standing at the edge of an open space about 40 feet across, roughly circular, with the forest walling it in on every side. It was a campsite, or it had been, but not like any campsite I'd ever seen. The stones around the fire pit were arranged in a perfect square. Not roughly square, the way you'd stack rocks to contain a fire. Geometrically precise. Each stone was approximately the same size, and the gaps between them were even. The fire pit itself was lined with flat stones, laid edge to edge, like tiles. Around the square, at equal intervals, 4 logs had been placed. They were old gray, weathered, cracked, but they'd been cut, not fallen. The ends showed the marks of a saw, and they were positioned with the same deliberate symmetry as the stones, each one equidistant from the fire pit, each one parallel to the others. In the center of the fire pit, on top of the flat stones, sat a small cairn. 5 rocks, stacked largest to smallest, balanced with a precision that shouldn't have survived the first strong wind. Marin stepped into the clearing slowly. I watched her turn in a full circle, taking it in. "This isn't a campsite," she said quietly. I don't know what this is." Cal was already walking the perimeter. He stopped at the far side and put his hand on one of the trees at the clearing's edge. "There's something carved here." Marin and I went to him. The tree, a thick trunk larch, its bark pale and flaking, had symbols cut into it. Simple geometric shapes, a circle with a line through it, a triangle inside a square, a series of short parallel lines, like the tally marks we'd seen earlier, but arranged in patterns that felt intentional, decorative, almost, or notational, like someone's private language. The carvings continued on the next tree, and the next. Every tree at the clearing's edge carried them, a ring of symbols surrounding the geometric campsite, like a border around a page. I felt it then, that sensation everyone knows but no one can adequately describe. The feeling of being watched, not the intellectual suspicion that someone might be observing you. The physical sensation, the prickling at the base of the skull, the involuntary tightening of the shoulders, the ancient animal awareness that there are eyes on you and they belong to something you cannot see. I looked at Marin. She felt it too. I could see it in the way she was standing, weight slightly forward, hands still at her sides, head tilted the way a deer tilts its head when it's deciding whether to run. "I don't like this," she said. Not dramatically, not fearfully, just stating a fact, the way she'd say the stove is out of propane or it's going to rain. "It's just an old camp," Cal said, but his voice was different. The easy confidence from the morning had thinned. He took a photo of the clearing with his phone, and as he raised the phone, I saw that his hand wasn't entirely steady. We left. The last mile to the ridge was steep and open. The trees fell away, and we climbed through a field of broken granite and low scrub, the wind hitting us for the first time all day, cold and steady from the northwest. By the time we reached the ridgeline, we were breathing hard and sweating despite the chill, and the view opened up in front of us like a door swinging wide. The entire valley. The lake, our lake, was a small blue-green jewel set in the dark expanse of the forest, maybe 4 miles to the south, its teardrop shape unmistakable. The creek drainage ran north from it like a silver thread. The ridgelines folded away to the east and west, layer after layer of forested mountains fading to blue at the horizon. It was staggering, the kind of view that makes your problems feel temporary and the world feel permanent. We stood there in the wind and looked at it and didn't speak for a long time. Cal unpacked the lunch sandwiches, apples, trail mix, and we sat on the rocks and ate. The mood lightened. Cal told a story about a client at the climbing gym who had tried to free solo a 5.11 route on his first day and ended up hanging from a hold 12 feet off the ground screaming for a ladder. Marin laughed in that way she had, sudden, genuine, louder than you'd expect. It was good. It felt like the trip again. Then Marin said, "Hand me the binoculars." I passed them over. She raised them and scanned the valley, moving slowly from east to west. "I can see our camp," she said. "The tent, the table. It's tiny, but it's there." A pause. "Huh. What?" She adjusted the focus. "There's smoke." Cal and I both turned. "Where?" he said. "South of the camp, just inside the tree line. It's thin like a small fire, or the end of one." I took the binoculars. It took me a moment to find it. The scale was deceptive from this distance. But then I saw it. A thin, pale column of smoke rising from the forest just south of the eastern shore. Close to our campsite. Very close. We hadn't left a fire burning. The coals from breakfast had been cold when we left. I was certain of that. I had checked. "That's right next to our camp," I said. "Could be further away than it looks," Cal said. "Depth perception's tricky at this distance." I kept watching. The smoke was thin and gray, barely visible against the dark trees behind it. It rose straight up in the still air for about 20 feet and then dispersed. Then it stopped. Not tapered off, not thinned gradually. It stopped, as if someone had put out the fire, deliberately, quickly. I lowered the binoculars. Marin and Cal were both looking at me. "It's gone," I said. No one spoke for a moment. The wind blew across the ridgeline. A hawk circled somewhere below us, riding a thermal. "We should go back," Marin said. We packed up and started down. The return hike was faster. We didn't discuss it. Our pace just quickened naturally, pulled by something none of us were willing to name. The descent through the granite field, back into the trees, through the clearing with the geometric campsite. We didn't stop this time, didn't look up past the creek crossing, past the tree with the tally marks. The forest felt different. The light had shifted with the afternoon, the sun now behind the western ridge, and the trees were in deep shadow. The temperature had dropped. The silence had a different texture, thicker, closer, like a fabric drawn tight. About a mile from camp, I heard it. A whistle. 3 notes, rising, then falling, then rising again. Clear and deliberate, the kind of sound a person makes when they're calling someone or something across a distance. It came from somewhere to our left, west, deeper in the trees. Maybe 100 yards away, maybe less. We stopped, froze really. The 3 of us standing in a line on the trail, not breathing, listening with every part of ourselves. The forest was silent. Cal whispered, "That was a person." Marin said nothing. Her eyes were moving across the trees, searching. I listened for 15 seconds, 20, 30, nothing. Just the forest holding its breath again. That same silence from last night, not empty, full. The silence of a theater right before the curtain goes up. We kept walking, faster now, not running, but close. The kind of pace that's one bad thought away from running. 200 yards from camp, Cal stopped and held up his hand. We halted behind him. He lifted his chin slightly, like a dog catching a scent. "Wood smoke," he said quietly. I inhaled. He was right. Faint but unmistakable, that particular smell of burning wood. The kind that works into your clothes and your hair and stays there. Not our fire. Something closer. Something recent. We stood there, breathing it in, staring at the trees ahead of us where our campsite waited beyond the last line of timber. Then the smell faded, like a door closing, like someone had put something out and let the wind take the last of it. Cal looked back at me. His expression was the one I imagined my own face was wearing, a complex negotiation between logic and instinct, between the part of the brain that says there's an explanation and the older, quieter part that says run. We walked the last 200 yards in silence and stepped into our camp. Everything was exactly as we left it. I need you to understand what I mean by that, because exactly is a word people use loosely. They say exactly when they mean roughly. They say exactly when they mean close enough that I didn't notice a difference. That's not what I mean. I mean exactly. I stood at the edge of camp and I ran the inventory the way I always did, item by item, position by position, angle by angle. And every single thing was where I had left it. Not approximately where I had left it. Not more or less in the right place. Where I had left it. The tent, zipped to the midpoint. Zipper pull hanging at 2 o'clock. Same. My boots. Outside the vestibule, toes outward, 45 degrees, right boot slightly forward. Same. Marin's sandals. Beside the left guy line, soles up. Same. Cal's boots. Opposite side, unlaced, tongues folded back. Same. The cooler. 3 feet left of the fire ring, lid closed. Latch facing camp. Dish towel over the handle. Same. The folding table. 2 chairs pushed in. 1 pulled back at the angle Cal had left it. Same. Water bottles. 3 right side of the table. Red, blue, stainless steel. Same order. Same spacing. Same. Cal's fishing rod. Leaning against the same tree. At the same angle. The reel facing the same direction. Same. Fire ring. Cold coals from the morning. Undisturbed. Same. Cal's hatchet leaning against the flat rock. The tin can still sitting on top of the rock where Cal had placed it the day before. Same. Everything. Every single detail I had cataloged that morning was precisely, perfectly in place. I should have been relieved. I wasn't. There's a concept in robotics called the uncanny valley, the idea that a thing can be so close to right that it becomes deeply, fundamentally wrong. A face that's almost human, but not quite. A voice that's almost natural, but something is off. That's what our campsite felt like. Too perfect. Too unchanged. As though someone had studied it, understood it, and reproduced it with a fidelity that no natural process of leaving and returning could account for. Because here's the thing, when you leave a campsite for 8 hours, things should change. A breeze should shift something. A chipmunk should knock something over. Gravity and time and weather should leave fingerprints. But our camp looked frozen, preserved, like a photograph that someone had built in 3 dimensions. Cal didn't feel it. Or, if he did, he pushed through it with the particular force of will that Cal applied to things he didn't want to think about. He dropped his day pack by the tent, stretched his arms overhead and said, "See, everything's fine." The smoke was from another camp, further out. We got spooked over nothing. Marin didn't say anything. She was standing near the table, looking at the camp with that careful attention of hers. Not the broad sweep I did, but something more intuitive. She wasn't checking items against a list. She was feeling the space. And I could see in her posture that the space didn't feel right to her either. But neither of us said anything. What would we have said? It's too perfect. Nothing moved while we were gone. Those aren't concerns you can voice without sounding ridiculous. So we settled back in. Cal started rebuilding the fire. I organized the day packs. The light was going golden over the lake, the sun dropping toward the ridge, and the temperature was falling quickly. In an hour, it would be dark. Marin walked to the table. She reached for her camera, casually, the way you'd pick up your phone. She wanted to photograph the evening light on the water. She'd done the same thing at every campsite for 5 years, collecting golden hour shots the way other people collect souvenirs. She unclipped the solar panel cable, picked up the camera, turned it on, swiped to the gallery, and went still. Not a sudden stillness, a slow one, like watching a lake freeze. Her thumb stopped moving on the dial. Her shoulders drew inward by a fraction. Her breathing changed. I could see it from 15 feet away. The rhythm of her chest shifting from relaxed to held. The way you hold your breath when you've heard a sound you're hoping you imagined. Nate. Her voice was level, controlled. The voice she used with her students when something had gone wrong in the lab and she needed everyone to stay calm. "Come here." I walked to her. Cal looked up from the fire pit. "What is it?" I said. She turned the camera toward me. The small LCD screen glowed in the fading light. The gallery showed thumbnails, rows of small images. The first several were Marin's, the shots she'd taken the day before, of the drive, the trailhead, the lake when we first arrived. I recognized them. Then there were new ones, 14 of them. Marin hadn't touched the camera since she'd plugged it into the charger that morning. It had sat on the table all day, cable attached, lens cap on. Nobody had been here. Nobody should have touched it. But someone had. "Scroll through them," Marin said quietly. I took the camera. Cal was beside me now, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body in the cold air. I started at the first new photo and moved through them slowly. Photo 1, our campsite. Taken from roughly where I was standing now, near the table, facing the tent. It showed the tent, the boots beside the vestibule, the cooler, the fire ring. The framing was careful, deliberate, composed. Even the tent positioned in the left third of the frame, the lake visible through the trees in the background. Not a snapshot, a photograph taken by someone who understood composition. Photo 2, my book. The Living Mountain, open on the sleeping bag, spine up, page 143. The camera had been low for this shot. Whoever took it had knelt or crouched inside the tent to frame it. Close enough to read the text. Close enough that I could see the crease in the spine where I'd bent it too far one night. Photo 3, Marin's jacket draped over the folding chair. The camera had captured the way the light fell across the fabric, the way one sleeve hung longer than the other. It looked like something from a catalog, like someone had found beauty in an object Marin had placed without thinking. Photo 4, Cal's boots by the tent entrance. The unlaced tongues, the dried mud on the soles. Shot from ground level, almost intimate in its closeness. Photo 5, the view of the lake from the camp table. This one stopped me, because this was the view from where the camera had been sitting. Whoever took this photo had stood at our table, picked up the camera, and photographed what the camera itself had been looking at all morning. There was something unbearable about that, something almost mocking. I was right here, I saw what you see, I stood where you stand. Cal said, "Keep going." Photo 6, and the world tilted. It was the three of us, on the trail, shot from behind, through trees, maybe 50 feet away. We were walking in our usual order, Cal, Marin, me, single file, through the dense timber. We were maybe a mile from camp. The photo was slightly obscured by a branch in the foreground, a spray of fir needles blurring the bottom third of the frame. Taken by someone standing in the trees to our right. Someone we had walked past without knowing. Photo 7, Cal, crouching at the creek, looking at the boot print. Shot from upstream, behind a large boulder, maybe 40 feet away. Cal's face was in profile, his expression focused, studying the mud. Behind him, Marin and I were visible, standing on the trail. We were looking down at the boot print. We were not looking at the boulder. We were not looking anywhere near the camera. Photo 8, the three of us, standing at the edge of the geometric clearing. We were looking inward at the stone circle and the cairn. The photo was taken from the tree line on the opposite side of the clearing. Whoever took it was standing among the carved trees, the symbols on the trunks visible at the edges of the frame. We were clearly unaware. Cal had his phone out, taking his own photo. Marin was standing with her arms crossed, her posture stiff. I was looking at the ground. Photo 9, Marin and me, on the ridge, eating lunch. This one was close, 30 feet, maybe less, taken from among the scrub brush and broken granite, slightly uphill from us. I could see the sandwiches in our hands. I could see the expression on Marin's face. She was mid-laugh, her eyes crinkled, her head tilted back. She looked happy, She looked completely unaware that she was being photographed from 30 feet away by someone hiding in the rocks. I looked at Marin standing beside me now, looking at the same photo. The contrast between the woman in the image and the woman next to me was staggering. Same face, entirely different person. Photo 10, me, just me. Standing on the ridge with Cal's binoculars raised to my eyes, scanning the valley. I was looking south toward our camp, toward the smoke. I was searching for whoever was doing this, and while I searched, they were behind me. 10 feet behind me, maybe less, photographing the back of my head while I looked for them in the wrong direction. My hands were shaking. I didn't try to stop them. Photo 11, the three of us on the return hike, walking fast through the deep shadow timber. The photo was taken from the right side of the trail, slightly ahead of us. Whoever took it had gotten in front of us. They had moved through the forest faster than us, paralleling our route, and positioned themselves ahead so they could photograph us approaching. Photo 12, another shot from the return, this one from the left, behind us now. We were moving quickly, you could see it in the blur of Cal's arms, in the forward lean of our postures. The light was low, the image darker, grainier, but clear enough. At the far left edge of the frame, almost cut off, there was a shadow on the ground. Long, stretched by the low-angle sun. The shape of a person, but the proportions were wrong. The limbs too long, the torso too narrow. Or maybe it was just a tree shadow, distorted by the angle and the uneven ground. I wanted it to be a tree shadow. I wanted that very badly. Photo 13, our campsite again. But this time from outside the camp, from the tree line to the south. Shot through a gap between two trunks. The camp was visible in full. The tent, the table, the fire ring. Marin's camera was visible on the table, small but identifiable. This photo was taken after the camera had been returned to the table. Whoever did this had picked up the camera, carried it with them all day, brought it back, replaced it in its exact position, and then walked to the tree line to photograph the scene they'd restored. I looked at the timestamp, 3:41 p.m. We had arrived back at camp at 4:09 p.m., 28 minutes. They had been standing in those trees, looking at our camp, 28 minutes before we walked out of the forest and into it. Photo 14, the last one, a selfie. I almost didn't understand what I was looking at. The image was close, too close, aggressively close, as though the camera had been held inches from a face. It was out of focus, the autofocus confused by the proximity, and what it captured was a blur of skin and shadow and shape. But there was enough. The lower half of a face, a jawline, angular. The corner of a mouth, lips slightly parted. Teeth visible, not bared, not snarling. Just visible, the way they are when someone is smiling. A small smile, a private smile. The smile of someone who finds something amusing that no one else is in on. The background was a green blur, forest. The foreground was the dark mass of a shoulder or a collar. That was all. No eyes, no identifying features. Just a jaw and teeth and the ghost of a smile and the deep green nothing of the woods behind. The timestamp, 3:47 p.m., 22 minutes before we returned. Cal took the camera from my hands. I let him. My fingers had gone numb around it. He scrolled through the photos again, faster this time, his jaw working. He got to the last one, the selfie, and stared at it for a long time. "We need to leave," he said, "right now." "It's going to be dark in 40 minutes, I said. My voice sounded distant to me, like I was hearing it from another room. 8 miles of trail, no headlamps packed for the day hike. I have my phone flashlight, you have yours. Through that forest, at night. Cal, whoever did this knows these woods. They were ahead of us and behind us and beside us all day, and we never saw them, not once. If we're on that trail in the dark, then what? We sit here? We sleep here? In the place they were standing 20 minutes before we got back? Marin's voice cut through us both. Quiet, but with a weight that made us stop. If they wanted to hurt us, they could have done it on the trail. They were close enough, multiple times. We looked at her. She was standing with her arms crossed, her face unreadable in the fading light. They didn't touch anything, she continued. They put the camera back exactly where it was. They didn't take anything, didn't break anything, didn't leave a note or a message. They left photographs. They wanted us to know they were there, but they didn't want to confront us. That doesn't make me feel better, Cal said. It isn't supposed to, but it means running through the dark is more dangerous than staying. She looked at both of us. Her eyes were steady, but I could see what it cost. Her the slight tremor at the corners of her mouth. The way her hands were pressed flat against her own arms, holding herself together. We stay, she said. We build the fire high. We take turns watching. And we leave at first light. Cal stared at her, then at me. Then at the forest pressing in around us on 3 sides. The trees already dissolving into shadow as the light drained from the sky. If anything happens, he started. If anything happens, we're together and we're awake, Marin said. That's better than being strung out on a dark trail in single file. Cal exhaled through his nose, a long, controlled breath. The breath of a man forcing himself to accept something his body was screaming at him to reject. Fine, he said, but the hatchet stays in my hands until sunrise. Nobody argued with that. The sun dropped behind the ridge. The shadows pooled and spread and deepened until the forest edge was just a dark wall of shapes without definition. I built the fire large, irresponsibly large, a tower of wood that sent flames 4 feet into the air, burning through fuel at a rate that would have appalled me any other night. But this wasn't any other night. Tonight the fire wasn't for warmth, it was for the light, for the circle of visibility it threw against the darkness, for the line it drew between what we could see and what we couldn't. We sat around it in a tight triangle, each of us facing outward toward a different section of the tree line, our backs to the flames. 3 people on a gravel shore surrounded by 8 miles of dark forest, watched by someone who knew exactly where they were. The night began. Time moves differently when you're afraid. I've thought about this a lot in the years since, and I think I understand why. Fear strips away the scaffolding that makes normal time feel normal. The routines, the distractions, the small unconscious assumptions that the next minute will be like the last. Without that scaffolding, each minute arrives raw, undiluted. You feel every second of it. A minute of fear contains more experience than an hour of comfort, and a night of fear contains more than some people's entire lives. That night contained a lifetime. The fire was enormous. I'd used half our remaining wood in the first hour, building it into a roaring pillar that threw light 30 feet in every direction and sent sparks spiraling into the black sky above the lake. The heat was intense sitting as close as we were. My face burned while my back froze, but the light was what mattered. The light was the wall. Everything inside it was ours. Everything beyond it was theirs, whoever they were. We ate because we needed to, not because anyone was hungry. Canned chili heated on the stove, eaten from metal bowls, tasting like nothing. Cal ate mechanically, his eyes never leaving the tree line to the south. Marin held her bowl in both hands but barely touched it. I chewed and swallowed and couldn't have told you what was in my mouth. While we ate, Marin picked up the camera again. She'd been turning something over in her mind. I could see it in her face. That particular inward focus she got when she was working through a problem, and now she was scrolling through the trail photos slowly, her thumb clicking the dial with soft precision. "Look at this," she said. Her voice was low and even, the voice of a scientist presenting data. "Photo 6, the first trail shot. We're walking north. The camera is to our right, east side of the trail." She clicked forward. "Photo 7, Cal at the creek. The camera's upstream, northwest." Click. "Photo 8, the clearing. Camera's on the south side across from us." Click. "Photo 9, the ridge. Camera is uphill, northeast." Click. "Photo 10, Nate with the binoculars. Camera is behind him, south." She lowered the camera and looked at us. "Do you see it?" I saw it. I'd been trying not to see it, but Marin had laid it out with such clinical clarity that there was no avoiding it. "They weren't following us," I said. "No. They were circling. The whole time. Every photo is from a different direction. They moved around us ahead, behind, left, right, continuously, for hours. Through dense forest, over rough terrain, without making a sound, without being seen." The fire popped. A log collapsed in the center of the pile, sending a shower of sparks into the air. None of us flinched. We were already beyond flinching. "How?" Cal said. "How is that possible? We were on the only trail. The forest on either side is thick. You can't move through it fast. Not faster than someone on a trail." "Someone could," Marin said, "if they knew the terrain, if they'd been moving through it for years. Or if there was more than one of them," I said. The silence that followed that sentence was the worst silence of the night, because it opened a door that none of us had considered. One watcher was terrifying. Multiple watchers, coordinated, positioned around us, photographing us from different angles. As we walked was something else entirely. Something that turned the forest from a landscape into an architecture. A structure designed to contain us. Cal stood up. He walked to the edge of the firelight with the hatchet in his right hand and stood there, looking out at the darkness beyond the shore. The lake was a black void to the east. The trees were a darker void to the west, south, and north. The only light in the world was behind him. "I'll take first watch," he said without turning around. Marin and I looked at each other. There was a conversation in that look, a compressed, wordless exchange that happens between two people who have been together long enough to make language optional. "Are you okay?" "No." "Are you?" "No." "What do we do?" We survived the night. We went to the tent. We didn't zip it closed. Marin wanted to be able to see Cal, and I wanted to be able to hear everything. We lay on top of our sleeping bags, fully dressed, boots on, and we watched Cal's silhouette against the fire through the open door of the tent. He sat in the folding chair nearest the fire, hatchet across his knees, facing south toward the densest section of forest. He didn't move. He barely breathed. He looked like a man carved from the same stone as the mountains around us. The first hour passed. Nothing happened. The fire crackled and hissed. The lake was silent. The forest was silent. An owl called once from somewhere distant, a great horn, that deep, resonant Hoo hoo hoo, and then stopped, as if it had thought better of announcing itself. The second hour, Marin's hand found mine in the dark. Her fingers were cold. She squeezed once, and I squeezed back. And we lay there holding hands like children in a house where the walls make sounds they can't explain. I was beginning to allow myself the dangerous luxury of thinking that maybe the night would pass without incident. That whoever had taken those photos had made their statement and moved on. That we would endure this vigil and walk out at first light and drive home, and this would become a story we told at dinner parties, embellished slightly. The fear domesticated by distance and retelling. Then Cal's silhouette changed. His head turned. His shoulders squared. The hand holding the hatchet shifted. He was listening. I held my breath. Beside me, Marin went rigid. From the trees to the south, maybe 50 yards out, came a sound. Footsteps. Not the careless crashing of an animal moving through brush. Not the quick, startled flight of something disturbed. These were footsteps, measured, deliberate. The steady, unhurried cadence of a person walking at their own pace through terrain they know intimately. Step, step, step. Slow, patient, moving left to right, west to east along the tree line. Cal stood up from the chair. The motion was controlled, precise. The motion of someone who doesn't want to show how frightened they are. The footsteps continued. They didn't speed up. They didn't slow down. They didn't stop. They moved through the darkness beyond the firelight, with the mechanical regularity of a metronome, and the sound was exactly loud enough to be heard, not accidentally loud, deliberately loud. As if the person walking wanted us to know they were there. As if the sound itself was a message. I'm here. I know you're here. I'm not hiding. The footsteps reached the eastern edge of the tree line near the shore and stopped. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. Cal was standing at the fire with the hatchet raised, his body angled toward the spot where the sound had ceased. Then the footsteps resumed, moving back the way they'd come. West, along the same line, same speed, same cadence, as if the person had reached a boundary, turned, and was walking back. They walked for about 30 seconds, then they stopped again, and this time, they didn't resume. Cal stood there for 5 full minutes after the last sound, staring into the darkness. Then he sat down slowly, his back to the fire, the hatchet white-knuckled across his thighs. He didn't move again for the rest of his watch. I didn't sleep. I don't think Marin did either. But we lay still, and we breathed, and we waited. At 1 o'clock, I touched Cal's shoulder. He startled badly, violently, his whole body jerking, and then saw it was me and exhaled. Footsteps, he said. His voice was hoarse, as though he'd been holding his breath for hours. About 50 yards out, they walked back and forth along the tree line, twice. I heard. They knew exactly where the edge of the firelight was. They walked right along it, like they were tracing a line. He handed me the hatchet. His palm had left a sweat print on the handle despite the cold. I'm not sleeping, he said. He walked to the base of a large fir at the edge of camp and sat against it, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them. His eyes stayed open. I don't think they closed until morning. Marin came out of the tent. She sat beside me, close, our shoulders touching. She didn't speak. I didn't ask her to. The fire had burned down. I added wood the last of the big pieces, and it climbed back to something respectable, but not the bonfire it had been. The circle of light shrank. The darkness pressed closer. 1:30, 1:45. The cold deepened. My breath steamed in the firelight. The lake was a sheet of polished obsidian, reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. 2 o'clock. The bird call came from the east, near the water. 3 notes, rising, falling, rising. The same pattern we'd heard on the trail that afternoon. Not a bird I recognized, not the thrush, not the owl, not any of the calls I'd learned to identify in 5 years of camping. It sounded like a bird the way a person doing an impression sounds like the person they're imitating. Close. Convincing to someone who wasn't listening carefully, but fundamentally wrong. The intervals between the notes were too even, too rhythmic, too considered. A real bird doesn't think about timing. This call thought about timing. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then silence. I stared toward the water. The shoreline was visible in the moonlight, a pale strip of gravel between the dark lake and the dark forest. And there was nothing on it. Nothing I could see. A minute passed. The call came again. Same 3 notes, same rhythm. But from the west this time, opposite direction, deep in the trees. My stomach dropped. Not because of the sound, because of the geometry. East, then west. 2 calls from 2 positions, a minute apart. Either the caller had moved impossibly fast through the dense forest surrounding the camp, or there were 2 of them. One at the water, one in the trees, communicating. Marin gripped my arm. Her fingers dug into the fabric of my jacket. "That's not a bird," she whispered. "I know. It came from 2 different places. I know." We waited. The calls did not come again. 2:20, 2:30. And then the new sound. Soft, rhythmic, almost mechanical. Click. A pause. Click. Another pause. Click, click. From the north, the side of camp we hadn't been watching. Close, much closer than the footsteps had been. Maybe 30 yards, maybe less. The sound of a camera shutter. Not a digital camera, something older, heavier, with a mechanical shutter that made a distinct sound. The kind of sound you hear in old movies when a photographer takes a picture. Click. A real, physical shutter, opening and closing. Someone was standing in the trees 30 yards from our fire, in the dark, and they were taking photographs of us. Again. My vision went white at the edges. I've never understood the phrase blind with fear until that moment, but it's literal. Your body floods with so much adrenaline that your peripheral vision collapses, and you can only see what's directly in front of you. And what was directly in front of me was the dark wall of the forest, and the sound click, 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 coming from inside it. Marin shook my arm. "Wake, Cal. He's awake." He was. I could see him against a tree, his eyes wide, his body frozen in that particular stillness of a prey animal that has been spotted and knows it. "Cal," I said. My voice came out as a croak. "Do you hear it?" "Shutter," he said. One word. His voice was barely a voice. Click. This one was from a different angle. East, closer to the water. The clicking was moving. Click, south again. We sat there, 3 adults, armed with a camping hatchet, paralyzed, and listened to someone circle our camp in the dark, photographing us from every angle, making no effort to hide the sound. The clicking moved in a slow arc from north to east to south, pausing for several seconds between each shot, then resuming. Patient, methodical. The unhurried pace of someone doing a job they'd done many times before. Then the clicking stopped, mid-arc, south-southeast. and the silence that replaced it was so total, so absolute, that the fire itself seemed to go quiet. The crackle of the wood dampened as though the air had thickened. 30 seconds of nothing. A minute. 2 minutes. I stared at the tree line to the south, where the last click had come from, and I willed my eyes to penetrate the darkness between the trunks. The fire threw its light to the edge of the gravel shore, maybe 30 feet, and beyond that was a wall of shadow so dense it might as well have been solid. Except, at the very edge of what I could see, where the firelight dissolved into blackness, between two large trunks that stood about 4 feet apart, there was a shape. It wasn't a tree. Trees don't stand between other trees at that spacing. It wasn't a branch, it was vertical, and it was still, and it had a density to it, a solidity, that the shadows around it didn't have. It was a figure, standing, facing the camp. I couldn't make out features. I couldn't make out arms or legs or a face. It was a shape tall, narrow, motionless, occupying a space between two trunks where no shape had been 5 minutes ago. It was dark against dark, visible only because it was slightly more dark than the darkness around it. The way a rock is visible underwater, not because you can see the rock, but because you can see the absence of water. It was watching us. I was certain of that. I couldn't see eyes, couldn't see a face, couldn't even confirm that it was human. But it was watching us with the focused intensity of something that has been watching for a very long time and has no intention of stopping. I stared at it. It didn't move. The fire crackled. My heart beat so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I wanted to say something, to Marin, to Cal, to point and say there. Do you see it? Between those two trees. But my mouth wouldn't work. My body had made a decision without consulting me, the ancient pre-verbal decision, to remain absolutely still in the presence of something that might be dangerous. To not draw attention. To not confirm that you've seen what you've seen. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, the space between the two trunks was empty. The shape was gone, or had never been there. I stared at the spot for another full minute, searching for any trace of it. A movement, a shadow, a disruption in the underbrush, and found nothing. Just trees, just darkness, just the forest being the forest. I didn't tell Marin, I didn't tell Cal. What would I have said? I saw something, but now it's gone, and I'm not sure it was ever there. That's not information. That's the kind of thing people say before other people start questioning their judgment. So I kept it. I folded it up and put it somewhere inside myself where it could sit without being examined. It's still there. The rest of the watch passed in silence. Real silence, no footsteps, no bird calls, no clicking. Just the fire and the cold and the three of us breathing and waiting for something that didn't come. At some point, 3:30, maybe 4, Marin leaned against my shoulder and closed her eyes. Not sleeping, resting, conserving something for whatever came next. I put my arm around her and held the hatchet in my other hand and watched the darkness do nothing. The sky began to change at 5:20. Not lighten, not yet, but shift. The black overhead softened to a deep blue-gray, and the stars began to fade, and the line between the ridgeline and the sky became visible for the first time in hours. The lake caught the first hint of pre-dawn and turned from black to a dark metallic gray, and the trees at the edge of camp emerged slowly from the darkness, like objects surfacing from deep water. First light. The relief was physical. I felt it in my shoulders, in my jaw, in the bands of muscle across my chest. that had been clenched tight for 7 hours. The world was coming back. The darkness was retreating. Whatever had been standing in it, if anything had been standing in it, was being peeled away by the slow, indifferent turning of the earth. Cal was on his feet before the sky had fully lightened, moving through camp with the quick, efficient motions of a man who has made a decision and will not be talked out of it. He pulled his sleeping bag from the tent, stuffed it into his pack, and started dismantling his corner of the shelter. "We're leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a suggestion. No one argued. We packed in silence. No breakfast, no coffee, no conversation. Just the sound of zippers and compression straps and nylon folding, and the camp coming apart, piece by piece, as the sky brightened and the first direct light touched the top of the western ridge. I was rolling the tent when I stopped, because I'd noticed something. The tin can was inside the tent. I need to say that again, because the first time I thought it, my mind simply rejected it, edited it out, replaced it with something more acceptable. I stood there with the half-rolled tent in my hands, looking at the spot where my journal had been lying on top of my sleeping bag. And for a full 5 seconds, my brain insisted that what I was seeing was something other than what it was. But it was what it was. The rusted tin can, the one Cal had found on the shore, the one he'd set on the flat rock by the waterline, the one that had sat there untouched for 2 days, was inside our tent. It was sitting on top of my journal, which was on top of my sleeping bag, exactly centered, placed with the same deliberate precision that characterized everything else about whoever was doing this. Someone had entered our tent during the night. Not during the day, when we were gone. During the night. While we were sitting 15 feet away. While Cal watched with the hatchet. While I watched with the fire. While Marin sat beside me with her hand on my arm. Someone had walked to the shore, picked up the tin can, walked past us, or around us, or through some geometry of shadow and silence that I cannot reconstruct. Unzipped the tent, placed the can on my journal, zipped the tent back closed, and left. Without a sound, without a trace, without any of us seeing or hearing or sensing a thing. The tent had been open all night. The vestibule unzipped, the door pulled back so we could see Cal at the fire. Anyone could have reached inside, but they would have had to reach past Marin, past me, past the folding chairs and the cooler and the fire ring. They would have had to move through the camp we were guarding, in the light of a fire we'd built specifically to prevent exactly this, and they would have had to do it while 3 terrified adults sat awake and watching. And they did. Nate, Marin's voice, she was behind me, packing the stove. "What is it?" I picked up the tin can. It was light, almost weightless, and the rust left orange streaks on my fingers. I turned it upside down. A piece of paper fell out. It was old, yellowed at the edges, soft with age, the kind of paper that's been folded and unfolded many times. It was roughly the size of a playing card, torn from something larger, a notebook, maybe, or a ledger. The edges were ragged, but the tear was old, darkened, and smooth with time. I unfolded it. A list of names, written in a small, neat hand, in ink that had faded to a pale brown. Just first names, no last names, no dates, no context. Just a column of names, one below the other, like a roll call or an attendance sheet. Thomas Ruth Warren, L.E. James, Margaret Dale, Francis Roy. Annette, Harlan, Virginia, Curtis. 13 names, old names. Names from another generation. The kind of names you see on headstones in small town cemeteries. Names that belong to people who grew up before television, before highways, before the world got small. Below them, in the same neat hand, but in different ink, darker, fresher, the lines crisper and more saturated, 3 more names. Nate, Marin, Cal. I stared at our names. My name. Written by a hand I didn't know, in a place I'd never been before 3 days ago, on a piece of paper that might have been older than I was. Written by someone who knew us, who had watched us, who had learned our names from our conversations, from our calls to each other across the camp, from the long hours of proximity that we never knew were shared. Cal was beside me. He took the paper from my hands and read it. His face did something I'd never seen it do, not fear, exactly, but a kind of recognition. The look of a man who has been telling himself a story about what's happening and has just realized the real story is much worse. "We need to go," he said. "Right now. No more packing. Just go." Nobody disagreed. We stuffed what we could into our packs in under 2 minutes. We left things behind: the folding table, one of the chairs, the solar panel charger, a bag of food. Things we could replace. Things that didn't matter anymore. Cal put the paper in his jacket pocket. I don't know why. Evidence, maybe. Or maybe he couldn't stand the thought of leaving it there for whoever came next. I took one last look at the campsite as we left. The fire ring, still warm. The flat spots in the gravel where the tent had been. The lake, mirror still in the early morning light, reflecting a sky so blue it looked artificial. The flat rock by the shore where the tin can had been sitting was empty. The camp was empty. But it didn't feel empty. It felt observed. It felt like a room with a two-way mirror. And on the other side of the glass, someone was watching us leave with the same patient attention they'd brought to everything else. We walked fast. Not running, there's a difference, and it matters, but moving at the maximum speed the terrain would allow. Cal was in front with the hatchet, setting a pace that was just shy of reckless. Marin was behind him, her pack bouncing against her back with each stride. I was at the rear, and I walked backward for the first quarter mile, watching the trail behind us, watching the trees, watching for any sign that something was following. Nothing. The forest was quiet. Morning light filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. Birds were calling, real birds with real songs, imperfect and beautiful. A squirrel chattered from a branch overhead. The world was behaving as though nothing had happened, as though this was an ordinary morning in an ordinary forest, and we were ordinary people going for an ordinary walk. We reached the creek crossing. The boot print was still there, in the mud, unchanged. Cal stepped over it without looking. We passed the tree with the tally marks. I glanced at it as we went by and felt my stride falter, because I could have sworn, I couldn't be certain, but I could have sworn that there were more marks than yesterday. New ones at the top of the spiral. Fresh cuts, lighter in color than the old ones. The wood inside them still pale and raw. I didn't stop. I didn't say anything. I kept walking. 5 miles in, Cal stopped. He was looking back down the trail, past Marin, past me, at something behind us. His face was very still. "Keep walking," he said. His voice was quiet and flat. "Don't turn around. Just keep walking." Marin looked at him, then at me. Then she turned and kept walking. I kept walking. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to see what Cal was seeing, to face whatever was behind us. But Cal's voice had the quality of a man who has considered the options and decided that ignorance, in this moment, is safer than knowledge. We walked for 100 yards. The trail curved slightly to the left, and the forest closed in behind us. "What was it?" I said. Cal was walking now too, his pace unchanged, his eyes forward. "Someone on the trail," he said, 200 yards back, standing in the middle of the path, not moving. "A hiker?" They were facing us, just standing there, watching. "What did they look like?" A pause. Cal's jaw worked. "Tall," he said. "I couldn't see details. They were just tall. And still. Too still." "And now?" He didn't look back. "I don't know." We didn't stop again. The last 3 miles were the longest of my life. Every sound behind us, a branch falling, a bird startling, the wind moving through the canopy sent adrenaline flooding through my limbs. My legs shook with it. My vision sharpened until I could see the individual needles on the fir branches ahead of me, each one vivid and precise and useless. The old logging road appeared, then the turnaround, then Cal's truck, sitting exactly where we'd left it, dust on the windshield, pine needles on the hood. Cal had the keys out before we reached it. We threw our packs in the bed and got in Cal driving, me shotgun, Marin in the back seat, and he started the engine and drove. He drove the way a person drives when they believe something is behind them. Fast, focused, with both hands on the wheel and no interest in the rearview mirror. The Forest Service road unspooled beneath us, gravel, then dirt, then pavement. The trees thinned, the sky opened. The world got wider. Cell service returned 30 miles later, like surfacing from deep water. My phone buzzed and chirped and vibrated with 2 days of accumulated notifications, emails, texts, a news alert about something happening in a country I couldn't care about. The sounds of normal life, the sounds of a world where people go to work and buy groceries and argue about parking, and nobody watches them from the trees. Cal drove to the nearest ranger station, a small building at a highway junction, brown wooden siding, an American flag hanging limp in the still air. We walked in and told the woman at the desk what had happened. She listened, she wrote notes, she made a phone call. A ranger called us 2 days later. His name was Harding, and he had a voice like gravel in a coffee can, deep, unhurried. The voice of a man who had spent decades in places that don't have cell service, and had made his peace with that. He asked us to describe everything. I did, in detail, the campsite, the hike, the boot print, the clearing, the smoke, the photos, the night sounds, the tin can, the names. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough to make me check if the call had dropped. "Mr. Brewer," he said, "I'm going to ask you to email me those photos from the camera. Can you do that?" "Already done. Marin sent them yesterday." "Good. We'll send a team out to the lake, probably early next week." I hesitated. "Has anything like this happened before, in that area?" A pause, longer than the kind of pause you take when you're thinking about what to say. The kind of pause you take when you're thinking about what not to say. "Not exactly like this," he said, "but we've had reports from that part of the range over the years." "What kind of reports?" "The kind that are hard to write up in a way that sounds official." He exhaled. "People finding things moved, signs of habitation where there shouldn't be any, structures. The stone circle, the symbols. We removed those in 2003, sent a crew in, took down the structures, documented the carvings, filed a report. And the person who made them? Not located." He said it the way you'd say case closed, with finality, and with the particular flatness of a statement that is technically true and practically meaningless. "I'll be in touch, Mr. Brewer." He hung up. 2 weeks passed. I went back to work. Marin went back to her students. Cal went back to Bozeman. We texted each other occasionally short, careful messages that circled the topic without landing on it. You doing okay? Yeah. You? Yeah. Talk soon. We didn't talk soon. We didn't know how to talk about it. The vocabulary didn't exist. What had happened to us occupied a space between experience and hallucination, between fact and impossibility. And every time I tried to describe it to myself, to Marin, to the empty room at 3 in the morning, the words fell short and the feeling remained vast and undiminished. Then Harding called. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk at work reviewing structural calculations for the bridge project, and his name appeared on my phone and I felt the floor shift under my chair. Mr. Brewer, we sent a team to the lake last Thursday. 3 people, 2 rangers, and a volunteer. And they found the site, your campsite, fire ring, flat spots for the tent, just as you described. The area was undisturbed. No signs of habitation, no footprints, no structures. The stone circle you described in the clearing to the north was not present. Either it was removed or it was never a permanent installation. The carvings on the trees were there, but old, nothing recent. I closed my eyes. So nothing. I didn't say nothing. I opened my eyes. There was one thing, Harding said. The phrase landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. A tin can, he said. Old, rusted, sitting on a rock by the waterline. The flat rock. The same flat rock where Cal had set it on our first evening. The rock I'd last seen empty as we fled the campsite at dawn. There was a piece of paper inside, Harding continued. A list of names. My mouth was dry, my pulse was loud in my ears. Our names, I said. A pause, the longest pause of my life, a pause wide enough to fall into and never reach the bottom. No, Harding said. 3 new names. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The names of the rangers we sent. The line was quiet. Harding was quiet. The world was quiet. And in that quiet, I understood something that I'd been resisting since the moment Marin turned on her camera at the lake. This wasn't about us. We weren't special. We weren't chosen. We were just next. 3 more names on a list that had been growing for years, maybe decades, in a forest that kept its own records and its own council. The names on the yellowed paper weren't victims. They weren't warnings. They were entries, an inventory kept by someone or something with the same meticulous attention to detail that I brought to the position of my boots and the angle of a zipper. They were being cataloged, and now we were in the catalog, and the rangers were in the catalog, and whoever went next would be in the catalog too. Mr. Brewer, Harding's voice. I'd recommend you don't return to that area. I wasn't planning to. Good. He hung up. I sat at my desk for a long time looking at the structural calculations in front of me, load distributions, stress tolerances, the mathematics of how much weight a thing can bear before it breaks. And I thought about a list of names in a rusted tin can in a forest 300 miles away, growing longer in the dark. That was 3 years ago. We never went back. The tradition ended. Cal and Marin and I still talk, still see each other, but we don't go camping. We don't discuss why. We've never spoken about what happened at the lake, not fully, not all the way through. The photographs are on a hard drive in my desk drawer. I've never looked at them again. I don't need to. I see them every time I close my eyes. Photo 10 me on the ridge, binoculars raised, searching for something that was standing right behind me. I sold the tent. I sold the camp stove. I gave the hatchet back to Cal, and he said he'd thrown it away, and I believed him because I needed to. But I kept the camera. Marin wanted to get rid of it, and I understood why, but I kept it. It sits in the back of our closet, in a box I've labeled camping gear, and I haven't touched it in 3 years, and I never will, and I'll never throw it away. Because the photographs on it are the only proof that any of this happened. Without them, it's a story, a campfire tale. Something that could be exaggerated, misremembered, invented. The photos make it real. The photos mean I'm not crazy. The photos mean someone was there. Sometimes I stand at the back window of our house at night. Not often, once a month, maybe less. I don't tell Marin. I wait until she's asleep, and I go downstairs, and I stand in the dark kitchen and look out at the backyard. The porch light illuminates the deck and about 10 feet of grass beyond it. After that, darkness, the fence. The trees along the property line, dug firs, the same species as the ones around the lake. Because this is the Pacific Northwest, and they grow everywhere, and you can never get away from them, not really. I stand there and I look at the darkness and I listen. Most nights, there's nothing. Wind, a dog barking 2 streets over. The hum of the neighbor's heat pump. The ordinary soundtrack of a life lived among other lives, in a world that makes sense, where objects stay where you put them, and no one is standing between the trees. But sometimes, rarely, once or twice in 3 years, I hear it. Distant, deliberate, gone before I can be certain it was ever there at all. Click.